Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. It started with a simple comment from Emily one Friday morning as we sipped our coffee, her gaze flickering as she looked anywhere but at me. "I'll be going out tonight," she said, her voice overly casual. "Probably won't be back until late." She'd always had a carefree spirit, but there was something too calculated in her delivery. Her words had a weight I hadn't noticed before, a hint of rehearsed indifference, like she'd prepared for this moment in advance. I wanted to question her, to pry open whatever guarded thoughts were behind her eyes, but something told me to wait. Pushing now would only make her retreat further into whatever secrets she was holding. Instead, I nodded and took a sip of my coffee, masking my unease. "Have fun," I said, offering a smile that felt hollow even to myself. She flashed me a quick, easy grin and left for work without a second thought. I watched her go, feeling the seed of doubt begin to sprout, taking root in places I'd previously trusted without question. That night, as I sat alone in our quiet house, I allowed my thoughts to wander. I'd heard the same stories so many times from friends and colleagues, stories of gradual drift and subtle, unexplainable changes that eventually revealed a whole life hidden beneath the surface. I'd never considered myself a jealous man, nor someone overly paranoid. I believed in trust. But tonight, I felt something shift inside me. Around midnight, she still hadn't returned. I texted her, a simple, "You alright?" that went unanswered. Hours ticked by, and I found myself scrolling through my phone, replaying old messages, rereading our usual exchanges. I noticed how, over the past few months, her replies had become shorter, vaguer. I shook it off, trying not to let my mind spiral, but the feeling that something was deeply wrong refused to fade. When she finally walked in around 2 in the morning, I was sitting in the dim light of our living room, a book open on my lap though I hadn't read a word. She looked surprised to see me awake, her expression barely concealing a flicker of guilt. "Had fun?" I asked, keeping my tone light, neutral. "Yeah, it was good," she replied, her gaze slipping past me as she headed toward the bedroom. There was no embrace, no kiss, just the soft sound of her retreating footsteps. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I laid awake, replaying our years together, scrutinizing every moment for signs I might have missed. How long had she been distant? Had I been blind, or had she been hiding it all too well? The next morning, I decided to trust my instincts. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I was overthinking, but I had to know. I began looking for subtle signs, small inconsistencies in her stories, things I'd normally brush off without a second thought. And gradually, I started to see patterns. Emily's behavior had shifted. She was suddenly more guarded with her phone, always keeping it face down on the table, brushing off any texts that came in. It was an odd habit I hadn't noticed before, one that seemed innocuous at first but began to stir a gnawing doubt in me. The trust we had shared for so many years now felt like fragile glass, and each casual glance at her phone felt like a tiny fracture spreading through it. Over the next few weeks, her nights out became more frequent, always under the guise of work events or catch-ups with old friends. But each time, her alibis felt less convincing, her excuses thinner, like a frayed rope about to snap. It was during one of these absences that I finally let my curiosity get the better of me. I knew it was wrong, she'd hate me for it if she found out. But I couldn't keep living with the feeling that my life was unraveling one night at a time. I waited until she was in the shower, her phone left momentarily unattended on the bathroom counter. Heart pounding, I picked it up, my thumb hesitating over the screen. I quickly swiped through her recent messages, trying to be as discreet as possible. Most of the names were familiar, but there was one number, saved under the initials, KJ, that caught my attention. The messages were short and to the point. "Same time tomorrow, read one." Another, from earlier that week, simply said, "Can't wait." I felt my pulse quicken as I scrolled further, catching snippets of exchanges that hinted at something far deeper, something that went beyond a simple friendship. I put the phone back, feeling a cold numbness spread through me. So, it was real. All the hints, the nights out, the vague excuses, they had all been leading to this. A part of me had wanted to find nothing, to be proven wrong. But here it was, in stark, unforgiving words. Over the next few days, I let myself sink deeper into the hurt and betrayal, but I kept a calm facade. I didn't confront her, didn't let on that I knew anything. I wanted to see how far she'd go, to see if there was even a hint of guilt, a moment where she'd come clean. But every time she left the house with that practiced, easy smile, I felt myself growing colder, more detached, like I was watching it all from a distance. Then one evening, as she was getting ready for yet another work dinner, I made a decision. I was done waiting, done feeling like a fool. She breezed past me in the hallway, her perfume trailing in her wake, and I caught her arm gently. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked at me, a slight frown on her face, as though my touch was an unexpected interruption in her well-planned evening. "Yeah," she replied, her voice tinged with impatience. "Can we talk?" I asked, gesturing toward the couch. She hesitated, glancing at her watch, before reluctantly sitting down beside me. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, as I gathered my thoughts. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve, almost let her walk out that door one last time. But I steeled myself, refusing to let her brush me aside. "I know," I finally said, my voice low but steady. "I know about KJ." Her face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. For a split second, I saw the walls she had so carefully constructed begin to crumble. Then, just as quickly, her expression hardened, her gaze shifting from shock to defiance. "What do you think you know?" she asked, her voice cold and guarded. I stared at her, feeling the last remnants of my patience slipping away. "I think I know enough," I replied, keeping my tone level. "Enough to know this hasn't been about work dinners or catch-ups with friends. Enough to know I'm not the fool you've been making me out to be." For a moment, she said nothing, just sat there, her jaw clenched, her gaze fixed on a spot across the room. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, as though she was debating how much she could still salvage, how much I knew versus what I might suspect. Finally, she let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping as the fight drained out of her. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Funny," I replied, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "Because it sure felt like you were going pretty far." She didn't respond. Instead, she stood up, crossing her arms as she paced the room, her gaze distant. "Maybe we weren't meant to last," she murmured. "People change, you know. Maybe we just grew apart." I shook my head, feeling a fresh wave of anger surge within me. "No, Emily. People don't just grow apart overnight. This, whatever this is, has been a choice, your choice. You decided this was what you wanted, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me." For a moment, I saw something that looked almost like regret flash across her face. But then she brushed it off, her expression hardening once more. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice flat. "Maybe this is on me." Without another word, she walked toward the door, her back straight, her head held high. There was no apology, no goodbye, just a quiet, final exit as the door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the silent house that had once been our home. I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle around me, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink in. It was over. Whatever love, whatever connection we had shared had shattered, and all that was left was a hollow shell. But even as I sat there, processing the wreckage of our life together, a new thought began to take root. This wasn't just the end, it was the beginning of something else. Something that would give me back control, something that would let me walk away with my head held high. I'd make my own plans. That night, after Emily walked out, I sat in the dark, letting the anger simmer quietly. It wasn't explosive or chaotic. It was a steady, growing flame. I thought confronting her would bring some relief, that the anger would dissipate, but if anything, it had just clarified one thing: I couldn't let this betrayal go unaddressed. I couldn't just walk away as the fool. The following morning, I began pulling pieces together in my mind, deciding how to handle it, how to get some closure on this mess in a way that felt right to me. Emily might think she'd won, that her escape was clean, but I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her choices, to know what it felt like to lose something she'd taken for granted. The first thing I did was head to the bank. We had a joint account, a few shared investments, things that had been easy to handle together. That was about to change. At the bank, I set up a new account in my name only, transferring half of our shared funds into it. I knew Emily wouldn't notice right away, too preoccupied with her secret rendezvous and whatever high she got from the thrill of her new life. But when she did, she'd know that my silence wasn't ignorance. Later that day, I called a lawyer, discreetly asking about a preliminary consultation. There was a brief pang of guilt. It was hard to wrap my head around how quickly things had turned. One day, we were together, the next, I was considering legal action against the woman I had built my life with. But that pang faded when I thought of her laughing with KJ, each lie she'd spun over our years together turning from truth to farce in my mind. Over the next week, I played the role of the calm, unsuspecting husband to perfection. Emily still hadn't brought up our confrontation, and I had stopped myself from doing so as well. It was clear she was hoping it would blow over, that she could keep on as if nothing had happened. But I could see she was tense, watching me from across the room, unsure if I was planning anything, trying to read me as if I were one of her clients. And that was when I decided to give her a taste of her own game. I stayed quiet, careful. The silence unnerved her, and she became more defensive, her veneer slipping more often. She couldn't know what I had planned, but she could tell I wasn't the same husband I'd been. She'd lost the warmth and ease she'd taken for granted. I could see her shifting, subtly trying to gauge if I still trusted her, testing if I'd let things slide. She began offering to spend evenings at home, cooking dinners she hadn't made in years, as if this renewed affection might make me forget what I'd discovered. Each attempt only fueled my resolve. As her guilt manifested in half-hearted attempts to rekindle our lost intimacy, I moved forward, carefully setting the pieces in place. I spoke to our friends and family with a calm indifference, testing reactions, feeling out who might know more than they'd let on. I was surprised how many of her friends seemed distant, keeping their responses guarded when I mentioned her. Had she confided in them? Had they known all along and turned a blind eye? The betrayals, it seemed, went deeper than I'd originally imagined. Finally, on one of her late nights, I drove to the restaurant where she was supposed to be meeting friends. I parked down the street and waited, hidden in my car. Sure enough, she arrived, but she wasn't alone. She was with him, a man I recognized vaguely, maybe from one of her old college events or parties. They laughed as they entered the restaurant, her hand resting easily on his arm, her gaze fixed on him in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. That's when I decided I'd seen enough. I snapped a few photos and drove away, feeling both a hollow satisfaction and a deep, aching emptiness. But I was done feeling like the wronged party. The rage, once chaotic and raw, had taken on a new shape. It was quiet and focused now, like the eye of a storm, pushing me forward with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The next step was as brutal as it was inevitable. I decided to take some time off work, using the guise of a minor health concern as an excuse to stay home. Emily bought the story without much hesitation, relieved to be off the hook from questions and confrontations. She went on with her routine, leaving me alone during the day to prepare things carefully. I packed a few things, essential documents, my laptop, anything I might need for a fresh start. I'd set up a new place to stay, a modest apartment just across town, somewhere Emily wouldn't think to look if she did eventually notice my absence. I was moving forward with my plan to leave her in every way that mattered. The day I left, I took one last look around our home. It was still the same on the surface, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal etched into the walls. I felt the sting of each memory that had once brought me joy, now twisted and tainted with her lies. I left her a note, brief and to the point. No grand declarations, no heartfelt confessions. Just a simple statement of what I knew and what I planned to do next. Then, I took her phone records, the details of her messages, and copies of the photos I'd taken, leaving them in an envelope with her name on it, to find when she returned. There would be no going back, no room for her to plead ignorance. She would have to face her choices head-on. I closed the door behind me, feeling the weight of my decision sink in. I hadn't just left our home. I had left behind the life we'd built, the years we'd spent together, and the man I'd once been, a man who trusted too easily, who believed in a version of love that didn't account for betrayal. The drive to my new place was surreal. I felt a mix of freedom and uncertainty, wondering if I'd done the right thing, if this new life I was stepping into would bring any more peace than the one I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the driveway of my new apartment, the clarity returned. I'd made my choice. I was ready to rebuild, to move forward without the shadows of Emily's lies looming over me. As I settled in, unpacking the few things I'd brought with me, I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Emily hadn't noticed I was gone yet. The calm gave me a chance to breathe, to reflect on how much my life had shifted in such a short time. I thought of everything I'd left behind, everything that had led me here. And as I sat alone in the quiet of my new space, I felt the faint stirrings of something I hadn't felt in weeks, peace. But that peace would be short-lived. I knew that once Emily found the note, once she came to grips with what I'd done, the real storm would begin. And I was ready for it. It was late when I got the first call. I was lying on the small couch in my new apartment, the bare walls and empty space a stark contrast to the home I'd just left. My phone vibrated insistently on the coffee table, the screen flashing Emily's name. I let it ring. It rang again, then again, and again. Finally, after nearly a dozen missed calls, the ringing stopped. I sat in the silence, my pulse steady as I imagined her storming through the house, searching for me, finding the note I'd left, discovering the half-empty closets and the bank account balance that now read far less than she'd remembered. The buzzing started up again, but this time it was a message. A dozen came in quick succession, each one a small outpouring of desperation, confusion, and, finally, anger. How could you do this? Where are you? I can explain, just come home so we can talk. This is not the way to handle things, Mark. I read each one slowly, feeling the satisfaction simmer just below the surface. I let her messages pile up, taking my time before replying. There was no rush, I wanted her to stew in her own mess, to feel the uncertainty gnawing away at her. Eventually, I texted back a single line. I know everything. It's over. Her response came almost immediately. Mark, please. You're being dramatic. You're not even giving me a chance to explain. I shook my head, staring at the phone. The audacity, the entitlement, it all played out in her words as if she had rehearsed them. There was no apology, no remorse, just excuses waiting to be served. She was playing the game, the same one she'd been playing all along, but now she was losing. For the next few days, the calls continued, the messages piling up, each one a carefully crafted attempt to get me back, to reel me in just long enough for her to explain things her way. But I'd seen enough, I knew she would try to spin the story, cast herself as the victim, and shift the blame to anyone but herself. Finally, on the third day, she showed up at my office. I had been expecting her, of course, I knew she wouldn't be content with silence. She cornered me in the parking lot, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face a storm of anger and desperation. Mark, she began, her voice breaking, what the hell are you doing? You can't just leave like that. I looked at her, calm and unmoved. I think I can. Mark, she stepped closer, her gaze intense, I get it, okay. You're angry. But we have to talk about this. This isn't something you just walk away from. I held my ground, watching her. You didn't seem interested in talking before. Now that I'm gone, suddenly you want to discuss it. Her face flushed, a mixture of shame and defiance. I made a mistake, all right. Everyone makes mistakes. We were in a rut, and I didn't know how to handle it. A mistake. I echoed, my voice cold. Is that what this is to you? She blinked, caught off guard by the quiet edge in my tone. Yes, Mark, a mistake. I was confused, and things just got out of hand. I shook my head, disgusted. You mean you let them get out of hand? Don't downplay this, Emily. You made a choice, again and again, every time you walked out that door. You knew what you were doing, and you chose it anyway. Her face tightened, a flicker of anger replacing the guilt in her eyes. And you're perfect? You think you're blameless in all of this? You think you never did anything that made me feel like I had to look elsewhere? I almost laughed. You're trying to twist this on me. She held my gaze, stubborn and unyielding. Maybe I am, because it's true. You were always working, always distracted. You stopped caring a long time ago. I watched her, my jaw clenched as I kept my voice steady. You don't get to rewrite this story, Emily. You were the one sneaking around, not me. If I was distant, it's because you were giving me every reason to be. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of her choices settling between us. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. What do you want from me, Mark? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Do you want me to beg? To tell you I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you, I'm sorry I was stupid. But I thought we could work this out. I thought you loved me enough to try. I felt the bitterness twist inside me, and I shook my head slowly. It's too late, Emily. You killed whatever we had the moment you decided to hide this from me. The trust is gone. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. So that's it? You're just going to throw away everything we built together? Just like that? You threw it away first, I said, the words sharp and final. I stepped back, watching as her face crumpled with a mix of hurt and disbelief. Go home, Emily. There's nothing left for us here. She stared at me, her eyes pleading, but I held firm. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched, her footsteps heavy. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. But I wasn't done yet. Her departure from my life was only part of the closure I needed. There were still things to settle, things she didn't yet know. I had spent the past week setting up my own plans, a subtle revenge that would leave her with the full weight of her choices. The next morning, I called our landlord to let him know that I'd be moving out. Emily, however, would be responsible for the lease. I explained that I had already removed my name from the contract, that she was fully aware and had agreed to take over the payments. It was a lie, of course, but it was one I was willing to make. I filed for divorce the same day, making sure the papers would be delivered to her in the most inconvenient way possible, at work, in front of her colleagues. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the sting of knowing that her betrayal wasn't a secret she could control anymore. When I went to collect the last of my things from the house, I left her a final note. I didn't waste time with explanations or apologies. I simply told her that she'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. That I had no interest in rebuilding what she had so carelessly torn apart. 2 days later, a friend called to tell me the news. Emily's affair had spread through our social circle, whispers and half-truths twisting into full-blown rumors. Friends who'd once admired us as a couple now regarded her with cold suspicion, and she'd been left to face the fallout alone. I stayed away, cutting off contact with mutual friends who felt the need to meddle, distancing myself from the life we'd shared. I wasn't interested in the gossip, the judgments, or the sympathy. All I wanted was to close this chapter and start fresh. In time, the noise faded. The calls stopped. The messages went silent. And one day, as I sat in my new apartment, the world beyond my door peaceful and quiet, I realized I'd finally found the closure I'd been searching for. Emily was a chapter of my life that was over, a story that would eventually become a distant memory, something to look back on and wonder at. In that silence, I felt a calm, steady strength. I had faced my darkest fears, walked through betrayal and heartbreak, and emerged on the other side. Emily had been the end of one life, but she had also been the beginning of another. It was time to start over. The first few months after the divorce were a strange, quiet period. I filled my days with work and threw myself into new hobbies, a distraction that kept me from looking back too often. Yet there were moments, quiet, unexpected ones, when memories of my life with Emily would slip through, reminding me of the life I had almost convinced myself was still perfect. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I considered ignoring it. But something told me to pick up, and I answered with a cautious, "Hello? Mark? This is Claire." I blinked, surprised. Claire was one of Emily's closest friends, someone I hadn't seen or spoken to since the divorce. "Claire," I said, my voice wary. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause on the other end, and then she spoke, her tone unsteady. "Listen, I know we haven't talked since everything happened. But I think there's something you need to know. Can we meet?" Her voice had a seriousness to it, an urgency that unsettled me. Against my better judgment, I agreed, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe later that day. When I arrived, Claire was already seated at a corner table, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup. She looked up as I approached, a strange smile on her face. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice tense. "I know this is probably weird, but I didn't know who else to talk to." "All right," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What's going on?" She took a deep breath, setting down her cup before looking me in the eye. "I feel awful that it took me this long to reach out. But I need to tell you the truth about Emily's affair." I stiffened, feeling a rush of anger mixed with painful curiosity. "What else is there to say?" "I know about KJ, Claire. I know everything." She shook her head, a sad look in her eyes. "That's the thing, Mark. You don't know everything. Emily didn't have an affair with Kevin, or KJ, as you know him." I felt my pulse quicken. "Then who was it?" She hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "Mark. KJ isn't a person. It's a name she used when talking about you." The world seemed to tilt as I tried to process her words. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath, her face lined with guilt. "I know it's hard to understand, but the messages you found, the ones you thought were with someone else. She was sending them to herself as a way to vent. KJ stands for keeping joyful. It was some kind of coping mechanism she had, to help her through the rough patches. She confided in me about it a while ago, but I never thought it would lead to this." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're saying she wasn't seeing someone else?" Claire nodded, looking at me with a strange mixture of sympathy and regret. "I'm saying that what you thought were affair messages were actually her private journal, disguised in texts to herself. She'd write these conversations as if she was talking to someone else, to make sense of her emotions. She didn't want to burden you, so she kept it all private." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. The pictures I'd taken of her that night at the restaurant, the hand on someone else's arm, it was just an old friend. Everything I'd thought I knew began to unravel, and I felt the bottom drop out of my world. But the late nights? The changes, the secrecy, my voice trailed off, my own questions mocking me. Claire shook her head. She was dealing with stress, Mark. She'd been trying to handle it all on her own, to keep you from worrying. I think she was struggling with feelings of inadequacy, and instead of telling you, she used this KJ as a way to express what she couldn't say. A cold wave of realization hit me, and I fought to keep my voice steady. She really wasn't seeing anyone? No, Claire said softly. She wasn't. The full weight of what I'd done came crashing down on me. I had assumed the worst, letting my doubts and insecurities lead me to believe in a betrayal that didn't exist. I had left her, taken everything away from her, humiliated her at work, all for something that had never been real. I stared at Claire, barely able to breathe. Why didn't she just tell me? Claire looked down at her cup. I think she was afraid, Mark. Afraid that you wouldn't understand, that you'd think she was weak for needing a different way to cope. She didn't want you to see her struggling. For a long time, I sat in stunned silence, the weight of my choices settling heavily on my shoulders. Claire reached across the table, her hand resting gently on mine. I know this doesn't make it right, but I thought you deserved to know, she whispered. And maybe there's still a chance to make things right. I left the cafe in a daze, Claire's words echoing in my mind. My entire narrative of our marriage, of the past few months, had been a lie of my own making. I had destroyed our life together over my own assumptions and insecurities. When I arrived back at my apartment, I found myself staring at the empty walls, feeling a hollowness that went far deeper than I'd realized. Emily hadn't betrayed me, I had betrayed her trust, her vulnerability. I had been so quick to assume, so eager to exact my revenge, that I had destroyed something beautiful, something I'd never have back. For days, I wrestled with the truth, wondering if I could ever face her again, if she would even consider forgiving me. And in the stillness of those sleepless nights, I realized the bitter truth, I'd been the unfaithful one all along, unfaithful to the trust we'd built, to the woman who had loved me. Eventually, I wrote her a letter. I poured out everything I had learned, everything I had felt, and begged for her forgiveness, though I knew it was likely far too late. When I finally dropped it in the mailbox, I felt a strange sense of closure, knowing that whatever came next was no longer in my control. A month later, a response arrived, a simple, white envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single page, folded carefully. I forgive you, Mark. But it's time for us both to move on. I wish you peace. No apology, no anger, just a quiet goodbye, one that left me feeling more alone than ever. And in that moment, I understood the full cost of my actions, the irreversible toll my suspicions had taken. Emily had given me peace, the peace I thought I wanted. But it came at a price I would carry with me forever.